You're listening to Inside Content, the TV industry podcast. This show is brought to you by 3Vision, a global TV industry consultancy specializing in content acquisition, strategy, research, and business development. Each episode, we give you VIP access to the views and experiences of senior TV executives and discuss the latest TV industry trends and insights.
Hello and welcome to Inside Content. I'm Jack Thomas, Director at 3Vision. Today I'm joined by Matthew Henick, SVP at the Trade Desk, where he leads the new initiative in the Ventura TV operating system. In this episode, we discuss how the Trade Desk is addressing some of the biggest challenges in connected TV, like fragmented ad delivery, complex supply chains, and the need for greater transparency. We also dive into their partnership with DirecTV and what it signals about the future of the streaming experience for both consumers and industry players.
Introducing Video Markets Tracker from 3Vision, your go-to source for global TV data. We offer regularly updated regional and global reports covering pay TV, SVOD, AVOD, and FAST across Africa, MENA, the Americas, Europe, and Asia Pacific. Make smarter decisions with insights you can trust. Learn more at 3vision.tv. Now, on to the episode.
Hi, Matthew. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Hi, Jack. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good. Right. Thanks for joining us on Inside Content. Let's just dive in, I suppose. Can you just start by setting the scene a little bit for us and telling us about your role at the Trade Desk?
Sure. I am incredibly lucky to be leading the Ventura TV operating system team and project at the Trade Desk. The Trade Desk is over 15 years old. They are a demand-side platform, so they work in the ad tech space, particularly focused on the world's largest advertisers and agencies. And the Ventura TV OS is one of our first consumer-facing products, where we're building the software that actually sits in your television, helps you launch all of the amazing streamers and apps that you watch on your connected TV. I came to the Trade Desk because I've always been obsessed with this intersection of technology and entertainment, both technically, creatively, and commercially. It's been a bit of a rocky road. But previously I was at places like Meta and Epic Games and Fortnite and BuzzFeed, always working at that intersection. And in some cases, when working on things like the metaverse and Gen AI, it was very much in the future. But the industry has just made this amazing shift to being direct to consumer. And so I was really excited about focusing on the problems of today and now, which are making sure that streaming ecosystem, particularly in connected TV, is as fair and transparent and sustainable as possible for all the participants.
Excellent. So you've got a lot of experience, I'm sure, dealing with all sorts of different IPs interacting in one space with that past experience at Epic and Meta. So useful in its own way coming into CTV as well, as you're obviously dealing with all sorts of huge studios and their streaming propositions. In terms of the ad landscape for connected TV, where do you place or how do you define the Trade Desk's role within that today?
So the Trade Desk's main customer will always be advertisers and agencies. We are always representing the buy side, and we always align ourselves with growing their businesses. And that's the only time that we get the right to grow our business. And so over time, as we steward their money throughout the open internet, basically everything outside of the walled gardens, we're putting their ads in web and mobile and audio in podcasts, and then increasingly more and more into connected TV. And so we entered this space, as advocates for our advertising clients. And so what we're looking for is efficiency and transparency in how their dollars are being spent and how their businesses are growing. And so like we do with any other portion of the internet, that was our role entering CTV, is really making sure that it's the best place for our consumers' dollars. Over time, we introduced products like UID2, which is an identity layer, OpenPath, which takes our advertising clients and brings them as close together with our publisher partners as possible, so that $1 from an advertiser gets all the way to a publisher and not nibbled on by a bunch of intermediaries. And then the Ventura TV OS came from the perspective of looking at that ecosystem and realizing that it's not working as efficiently as it should. It's not as transparent as it should, and it's not working for our advertising partners like it should. And so our role in CTV is just like it is anywhere else, where we're trying to bring as much transparency and efficiency as possible. And if that benefits our advertising partners, it usually will benefit all the other partners as well.
Yeah, that's good to hear. So upon entering the CTV space more, what have you, on the advertising front, first of all, like, what have you noticed in terms of what's happening and the trends around CTV usage, ad spend across? Obviously, we've got AVOD's been there a while, Fast has now been there a little bit of a while, and we're seeing the SVODs having their own ad tiers now. What's the latest trends that you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, the biggest trend is thankfully that we're actually embracing advertising in connected TV. There was this moment when all the companies started to shift to direct to consumer, that even just announcing that you were going to direct to consumer raised your stock price, right? And then next, you announced without advertising because you didn't have to think about it, and then you announced how many subscribers you had, and your stock would go up again. And then we started to reach this point a couple years ago where it wasn't just about increasing your subscriber numbers; it was about making money and actually building a sustainable business, which is important for all sides of that equation. So that was the mega trend that at the Trade Desk, we were declaring would happen, and are happy that it has. Now that people are settling into building ad tiers, number one, that's where most of the growth are coming from in terms of subscribers for most of these apps, where having ad-supported tiers allows for better access globally to this content. It doesn't make it an economic threshold issue for people. So we're bringing more audience into the ecosystem. But the thing that comes along with that, because of how internet-connected advertising works, that there's a lot of folks who are not necessarily acting with transparency and fairness in mind. A streaming app in the US in particular can have over 100 different supply paths to a single ad, and that ad is firing thousands of times a second. And so it's very hard to keep track of who's nibbling on which dollars, who's taking dollars and not necessarily passing them along, where the data is sitting. And so that type of complexity and fragmentation is something that we're actively trying to reduce and make better. So when we think about those trends, those are the ones we're really looking at. We're looking at how clean the supply chain is, and then how happy each participant is in it. Are the manufacturers of televisions feel like they can build a sustainable business? Do publishers feel like they have a clear way to predict how well a show will do and how well that will mean for them commercially in order to keep investing in content? And so we're in this trend of, some people have called it peak TV, where we're making more stuff. We're making better stuff than I think we ever have at scale. But we need to make sure that that's economically feasible for the long term as well.
So it's, in terms of trying to clean up that pipeline, remove the nibblers, are these the things that sort of led you to start entering the tvOS space?
Yeah, I mean, look, if we looked at the history of computing, right, and I won't go all the way back to mainframes, but we'll start with desktop computers. We saw the power that an operating system has, right? We saw how Windows grew their business, and they were able to then move into other software spaces, and then the browser space, which I think maybe they pushed a little too hard, according to members of the government here a couple decades ago. But we saw the same thing in mobile phones as well, right? We're seeing the power that an OS gives you to basically dictate the laws of physics, and frankly, how you can use that power not for good for consumers, not for good for software developers or for advertisers. And so when we were looking at this equation, when we were looking at the supply chain, and we saw that nobody was really happy with it and nobody trusted it, we knew we had to get into the operating system game. What's a little bit different for us is that we are taking a very holistic view at this ecosystem. And so when we think about the Ventura operating system, there are both full stack versions where we control the user experience all the way to the back end, and other ones where we're able to break it down into modules to make sure that our number one goal of clarifying the supply chain is what we accomplish, and then we do it in a way that fits our partners' businesses.
Okay, and I guess could you drill down a little bit deeper into how the economics differ for you compared to what is the fairly standard model elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, at the Trade Desk, we've always, over the past 15 years, spent a lot of time at the beginning understanding our partners' businesses and understanding the entire ecosystem of how the money flows. And so while when we talk about supply chains generally, we're usually talking about the ad supply chain, but for Ventura, we looked at the entire supply chain of the manufacturing, delivery, and consumption of televisions. So we started with television manufacturers, and that is an incredibly tough business. You are making amazing hardware, admittedly, but forced to sell it at commoditized prices, which means that even if you're making the universally agreed upon highest end television in terms of quality, in terms of screen size, you're getting tens of dollars once every 6 to 7 years that you're able to sell that television. So that is increasingly moved television manufacturers into other revenue lines to see how they can make this work, which usually brings them into some sort of usage-based model, because they know that that television, even though they're making money once every 6 to 7 years, every month that television is spinning off cash in one way or another, and mainly through advertising. So we're seeing television manufacturers try to figure out how to do that, but even they would admit they're not experts in content and they're not experts in advertising. So some television manufacturers have been forced to create their own first-party operating system in order to leverage and prioritize their in-house fast service. If you don't have those capabilities or those resources, then you're faced with a pretty tough choice, which is to go to a third-party OS whose main pitch to you is, you can have the software for free, but you will never see a dollar that comes from it. We will keep those dollars for ourselves. So we thought there should be a better way there, which is where Ventura comes into place. But then when we march down that supply chain, the manufacturers sell to the retailers. The retailers are also in an incredibly tough spot. They're selling televisions and making money just on that point of sale, potentially in those tens of dollars too, and we're not even getting to hundreds of dollars. Once every 6 to 7 years, and then hoping that you're going to come back in their store 6 years later to buy another television. And some of those retailers have in-house brands as well of television, so they have an operating system choice to make. And if you're a retailer and you're putting, Amazon, the world's largest and most aggressive e-commerce competitor you ever have in your life, in the living room of your customers, it's going to be very hard to expect Amazon to have any incentive to send them back into your store. So there is a mismatch there. Then you think about the publishers who, again, have made this heroic shift to direct-to-consumer, are betting their entire businesses on it in order, and they made that shift to basically try and own their audience again and escape the clutches of the big tech industry. And surprise, all their apps are running on OSs by the same big tech players. At the same time, every major OS in the US, but also globally, has their own content service, right? We see Google TV with YouTube, we see Amazon with Prime Video. So you don't necessarily think as a publisher that you're getting a fair shake, and you're not, from your OS, because your OS has every reason to send every jump ball to keep it in-house, keep margin high, and service a different business. And so there's a distrust there. And it's something that as a publisher, you're also paying, usually a inventory share to your OS or a commission bounty. And so you don't necessarily feel like your incentives are aligned there. Same thing for advertisers. Again, the OS sets the laws of physics, and so those dollars necessarily aren't flowing through as cleanly as possible. And when you look at all of this, it all comes together in what ends up being like a suboptimal user experience. When you survey users and consumers whether they're making their television purchase choice based on OS, the answer is no. They're usually stuck with whatever comes their way, and for the most part, they all look the same. And so all those incentives stack up against the user, and in a way that I don't think is great for the audiences, and therefore is not great for the shows they're watching, which is not great for how they get financed. And so it's a tall order. But when we put these players back to back to back, we saw that there are clean incentives that can work for all of them that align with how our core business is built, which is stewarding our advertisers' money, putting it in the best place for them. And we don't think in many cases there's a better place than in television and movies and podcasts and other things that you would watch on your television.
Yeah, so obviously, as you've mentioned, a tall order in terms of the current situation and what makes it can be quite challenging for what sounds like almost every stakeholder involved in the process, potentially. You mentioned transparency earlier being quite core to the trade desk. How does that fold into the work that you're doing to make the sort of experience on CTV better?
Transparency in many ways is the whole ball game on the internet. So, we've seen this play out in the history of the company and in other places where we've brought more transparency in terms of identity. When we've brought more transparency in terms of price discovery, the markets have just become more efficient, which is always great for advertiser clients and frankly great for any advertiser, whether they're our clients or not. And so with CTV, it's the same playbook, which is we want to understand where the best place is to put our advertisers' dollars. And that requires transparency in terms of an anonymized way who these people are to make sure that we're giving them a great experience. No consumer wants to see the same ad every single time an ad fires for that whole day. That's bad for the user, and that's also bad for our advertising clients. We want to know what they're watching. We want to know how this dollar is going to move from the publisher to from the advertiser to a publisher like Disney, because Disney wants to know that they're not leaving money on the table. And so as we pursue transparency, it just brings more competition and more efficiency to a market. And we think that's better for everybody.
Nice. So building an OS is a big task in and of itself to try and resolve this. But obviously, it's only one part of the total connected TV experience. Obviously, ultimately, people are watching content on there. How do you see your role potentially expanding past just the sort of OS side of things and into the broader ecosystem as a whole?
Yeah, the phrase "just an OS" after we talk about how tall and ordered it is, but it's important. No, and I understand. I mean, I'll break it down even further, which is, I mentioned it before, but an operating system has so many different layers to it. And part of what's happening in the ecosystem right now is if you don't develop your own operating system, you're given a take it or leave it proposition, right? You're told, hey, you're not going to hire 200 engineers, so take ours. You can take it for free. The only price is that you'll never see a dollar from it. But you need to take the back end all the way to the front end, and the front end will look like the OS provider wants it to look, not how the OEM or the retailer or anybody else. And so even when we think about an OS, we've broken it down into its component parts where we have the most customizable OS in the industry too, where it's less important to us that you know the Ventura name and more important that you are getting the experience that the OEM, the television manufacturer, and the retailer wants you to have. And so there's near infinite ways that that's going to happen as well to make this even more sort of a fractal, where the colors, what other services are integrated in there, all in the effort to give the user the best experience possible. Similarly, we're doing that on the back end too, and our focus is on monetization, on how the ad ecosystem works. And so we bring, particular products like OpenPath, which ensure the most direct connection between publishers and advertisers, UAD2 for identity, OpenPass, which is our single sign-on solution where you can log in once to your television and it will log you into all of your other apps and subscriptions and bring them together. So when we think about the fully packaged Ventura OS and then being able to break out individual pieces of that, you'll see us expand into the ecosystem in ways that may not be completely obvious on its face, where you're not seeing huge Ventura logos in every cardboard box. And that's mainly because the purpose of the Ventura operating system is not just to grow our monthly actives for the OS, but to change the CTV ecosystem broadly. And that's one of the best parts of being part of the trade desk, is that, we can take that type of grander vision. Once you have elements of the software running on, essentially mini computers on the walls of every living room, you can really do interesting things of moving into other spaces of entertainment, gaming, and those types of things. But those will be further down the line once we help solve the problems in television and movies.
And you're talking about how some of the things aren't obvious, but they are solutions that once implemented, I think everyone will be looking back at them thinking, well, we should have done this years ago, like single sign-on. I think is a key one that I think even the lay user of a TV could definitely appreciate immediately. Obviously, the more recent exciting news on your end is your announcement of that you're working with DirecTV. What brought you into working with them, and what are you hoping to see come out from that?
So, like I mentioned, we're so focused on the ecosystem health, right? Which allows us the flexibility to do partnerships that it doesn't make sense for other people. In this case, for DirecTV, number one, they've been a longtime partner of the Trade Desk, and we know that they subscribe to the same principles around transparency in the open internet and protecting the premium open internet that we do. But number two, when we were spending time talking to users and using every product and offering out there, DirecTV has developed a user interface that we think is great, and we know that their users love. And part of the reason they were able to do that is because they have a full stack offering between all their subscriptions, which they have many and a diversity of, where you can get a full uh, set of live channels and streamers and whatnot, and then they also have these smaller genre packs. And because the OS and the content are being bundled together, they can do things that I think all users appreciate in terms of deeply integrating the content directly into the OS, and having an incentive just to help you find the best thing to watch, not necessarily something that helps one team at the company or not. And so when we recognized that and we started talking to them about the challenges they had in growing that UI, a lot of it had to do with dealing with the relationships with big tech companies and dealing with the relationships of how to get it into other users' homes. And we were able to solve that by using the Ventura backend, our monetization services and our catalogs, to sort of free them up to reach a bigger audience. So that was just another great example of the win-wins that are possible with Ventura that aren't, where we're not dictating what their UI looks like. It's already beloved and acclaimed, and we're just trying to help it find a new audience and help it fund a new era of content production.
It must be quite refreshing for them and someone else that you can come along and not enforce some brand new visualization or UX experience on them, but actually go with what is working. You're obviously stepping into a space you've talked about already, how dominated it is by big tech companies that have their own motivations within their experience to potentially divert you to their own services, whether that's their own fast network of channels or their own SVOD services or whatever it is they might have attached to other appendages of the company. It's obviously, nonetheless, quite in its own way, a mature market where a lot of these are very established names, and it's an expectation for a lot of people that they will see, these operating systems looking the way they do when they turn on the TV they buy. What are some of the biggest surprises or challenges or learnings you've had as you've entered into this market?
So one of the biggest surprises for us was the depth of mistrust in the ecosystem. We knew there were elements of it, but when you look at each individual party and how they interact with each other, it's highly competitive, and the incentives are crossed. If you're a publisher and the OS that you need to be on also has a competitive content service, you're just not going to collaborate with them in a way that benefits the user. If you're an OEM that is looking for an OS partner, and that OS partner 5 years ago told you they'll never manufacture televisions, and now they are, so therefore they are directly competing with you, you tend not to trust anybody else who's coming into the ecosystem telling them the same. So we've spent a lot of time and effort to make sure that all of our partners understand why we're doing this and why it's different than potentially some of our competitors, so that they know that we will never, and we are incentivized to never compete with them, because we are always protecting our advertiser and our agency partners and making sure that they have the best place for their dollars on the internet. So working through that, we knew would be something we needed to get over in terms of a hurdle, but it's even made it more clear why we need to be doing this in the first place.
So there's been a lot to think about in this conversation. I'm probably most curious about what you expect to see next, coming both from Ventura itself and the TV OS space in general.
So success for Ventura really is about changing what we think is a broken market, or at least a suboptimal market. And so our success metrics there are just as much about how many monthly active users we have in the Ventura ecosystem as much as how the ecosystem broadly is using. What are the common business practices and business terms that are out there in terms of making sure that publishers have as clean a relationship as possible and as sustainable a relationship as possible. Same thing with the OEMs, especially in this moment of tariff uncertainty and everything else. It is important that these folks have line of sight on how to build a business that can be around for 5, 10, 25 years. And so we're expecting to start to see these changes now and then, accelerating into the future as we come to market, but also as other players in the market see what we're doing and have to react to it. So that's most important for Ventura in terms of looking at this ecosystem health. Broadly, I think, the CTV space is going to continue to grow mainly all through advertising supported tiers and programming and offering. And that, also gives us more of a playground to play with to find the best possible way for this ecosystem to work together.
Brilliant. All right. Well, there seems like there's a lot to look forward to, especially for the consumer, if you start getting more involved with on the TV OS front. And I think, as you said, that there's a lot to be said with transparency. I think ultimately it will make everyone a winner and hopefully turn some frenemies into friends along the way. So thank you again, Matthew, for joining us. It's been really, really great to chat to you about this today. Any final thoughts before we finish off for today?
I think we're in a good place. We're incredibly optimistic about what the open internet can and should look like in the future, and I think we all just need to commit to transparency and protecting this part of the internet that most of the best content that humanity has ever created exists in movies, television, music, books, and so that's why we're so passionate about it.
Excellent. Well, looking forward to seeing the future with you guys. Thanks for joining us on the Inside Content.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Inside Content, the TV industry podcast brought to you by 3Vision. With decades of TV industry experience and real-world success, we know the ins and outs of the market like nobody else. To learn more about our TV consultancy services, head to 3vision.tv.